Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we dive deep into all sorts of fascinating topics.
I like that.
You know, sometimes I'm just amazed by the little things
Yeah.
that can totally shift our whole perspective. So how about we try something before we get started?
Okay.
Like right now, before we jump into this whole world of infectious diseases,
Yeah.
how about we just take a deep breath together?
Yeah.
Ready?
All right.
Inhale and hold and exhale.
Much better.
See, doesn't that already feel like a good start
I think so.
to boost our learning for today's deep dive?
Yeah, totally.
And speaking of amazing things, today's deep dive is all about penicillin.
Oh, cool.
It's a story that starts back in 1928 with this guy named Alexander Fleming, a petri dish, and a little bit of a messy lab.
I've heard this story.
So picture this. A clear zone just appears around some mold that just happened to be growing on staph bacteria.
Wow.
It's like the mold was saying, not today, bacteria.
That's one way to put it. It was truly a serendipitous moment that changed the course of medicine.
Right.
Penicillin was a game changer. Really?
Yeah. Early on, it showed incredible promise against bacteria, like Streptococcus neisseria and Corynebacterium.
Okay.
But, and here's the catch, it wasn't a magic bullet for all infections.
Oh, interesting.
Some bacteria, like E. coli, Pseudomonas, Proteus, and Haemophilus,
Yeah.
they seem to just shrug it off.
So even a wonder drug has its limits.
Unfortunately, yes.
That's pretty interesting. I've always wondered why penicillin can't just be taken as a pill for every infection.
That's a great question. To understand that, we need to unpack how penicillin actually works.
Okay.
In a nutshell, it targets something called transpeptidase.
Transpeptidase what now?
Transpeptidase. It's an enzyme, a little worker molecule that bacteria absolutely need to build their cell walls.
Oh, okay.
Think of it like this.
Yeah.
Imagine a building under construction.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
All right, good. The bricks represent the building blocks of the bacteria's cell wall, and the cement is the transpeptidase.
Okay.
Penicillin essentially prevents that cement from doing its job.
Got it.
No strong cement, no sturdy wall, and the bacteria can't survive. So penicillin weakens the bacteria's defenses, making them vulnerable.
Exactly.
Pretty ingenious.
It is.
So tell me, which was the first penicillin that doctors actually used to treat patients?
That would be penicillin G, the OG of penicillins.
The
The original gangster of penicillins.
Like it.
It was effective against certain types of bacteria, but it did have some weaknesses.
Oh.
For one, our stomach acid can break it down pretty quickly,
Okay.
making it less effective when taken orally.
So not ideal.
Right. And then there are these clever bacteria that produce enzymes called beta-lactamases.
Beta-lactamases.
Yeah.
Okay, that's going in my notes. But what do they do?
Well, they act like tiny Pac-Men,
Pac-Man.
chomping away at the penicillin molecule and rendering it useless.
Those sneaky little buggers.
Right. They're pretty clever.
So it's like a constant back and forth, right? Bacteria evolve, we develop new drugs, and the cycle continues.
An ongoing arms race.
It is. But before we get to that, I'm curious about what happens to penicillin once it actually enters our body.
That's where pharmacokinetics comes in. It's all about what the body does to the drug.
Ah, pharmacokinetics. I remember that term. It's about absorption, distribution, metabolism, and elimination, right?
You got it. Think of it as the drug's journey through the body.
Okay.
It gets absorbed into the bloodstream, travels to different tissues, gets broken down or transformed, and finally gets eliminated.
It's like a carefully choreographed dance happening inside us.
I like that analogy.
And with penicillin G, what's the main route out of the body?
Primarily through the kidneys. That's why dosage adjustments might be needed for people with kidney issues.
Makes sense. We wouldn't want too much of it hanging around.
Now, I remember you mentioned something called time above MIC. What does MIC stand for again?
MIC stands for minimum inhibitory concentration.
Okay.
It's basically the minimum amount of drug needed in your system to effectively inhibit the growth of the bacteria.
So it's not just about taking the drug. It's about maintaining a certain level in our system for a specific time to actually kill those bacteria. Exactly. It's like maintaining a steady stream of water to put out a fire.
Okay, that's a great analogy. Now let's talk about those bacterial defenses against penicillin. We learned that some bacteria produce beta-lactamases to break it down. Are there any other tricks up their microscopic sleeves?
Absolutely. It gets even more fascinating. Some bacteria can actually change their penicillin-binding proteins, those targets that penicillin tries to lock onto.
Wait, so they can modify their own structure to evade the drug?
Precisely. It's like they change the locks on their doors so the penicillin key can't fit anymore.
Wow. Bacteria are incredibly adaptable. It's like they're playing a microscopic game of hide and seek with the drugs we throw at them.
That's a great way to put it, and this is one of the reasons why bacterial resistance is such a challenge.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity. So if some bacteria are changing their locks, what are scientists doing to develop new keys?
That's a great question, and it leads us to a whole new class of penicillins, the penicillinase-resistant penicillins. But before we dive into that, let's quickly recap what we've learned so far.
Yes, a recap would be helpful.
Okay.
We've talked about penicillin's accidental discovery, how it attacks bacteria by inhibiting transpeptidase, and the challenges posed by those pesky beta-lactamases.
Right.
We also explored the journey of penicillin G within the body, from absorption to elimination.
Uh-huh.
And now we're about to learn about those new keys that scientists have developed to combat resistant bacteria.
It sounds good.
This is so cool. I'm excited.
Me too. All right, so we left off talking about how some bacteria can just change their locks so that penicillin can't get in.
Yeah, those sneaky little microbes.
But as we touched on earlier, scientists haven't just been sitting back watching this happen.
Right, of course not.
They've been hard at work developing new weapons in this fight against resistant bacteria.
Cue the superhero theme music. I'm ready for the next chapter in this penicillin saga.
All right then, let's introduce our anti-staph superheroes, the penicillinase-resistant penicillins.
Oh,
These include Oxacillin, Nafcillin, and Dicloxacillin.
those names even sound powerful.
Right. And their power lies in their ability to resist those beta-lactamase enzymes that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Remember those Pac-Man enzymes chomping away at penicillin?
Yeah, I remember those.
Well, these penicillinase-resistant penicillins are like penicillin with a shield. They can withstand those enzyme attacks and still do their job of disrupting bacterial cell wall synthesis.
Oh, so they can take those Pac-Man punches and keep on fighting. That's incredible.
Mm.
Does this mean they can handle any staph infection? Even those nasty MRSA infections we hear about?
That's a great question, and it highlights an important point. While these penicillins are effective against many staph strains, including those that produce beta-lactamases, they're not effective against MRSA, which stands for methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus.
MRSA, I've definitely heard of that one.
Yeah.
So what makes MRSA so tough to treat?
Well, MRSA has developed this modified version of penicillin-binding proteins called PBP2A.
PDP2A. Okay, another one for the notes. What is that, and why does it make MRSA so difficult to kill?
Think of it this way. We know that penicillin works by targeting penicillin-binding proteins, those crucial components of bacterial cell walls.
Yeah.
Well, MRSA has developed a modified version of these proteins called PBP2A.
So it's like MRSA has upgraded its defenses.
Exactly. And this PBP2A has a very low affinity for all penicillins, including our anti-staph superheroes. It's like MRSA has a super shield that repels even our most advanced penicillin weapons.
Okay, so even our superheroes have a kryptonite. That's a bit concerning.
It is a significant challenge, and MRSA infections often require treatment with different types of antibiotics.
Okay, so it sounds like knowing the specific type of bacteria causing the infection is absolutely crucial.
Absolutely. Doctors use lab tests to identify the bacteria and determine which antibiotics it's susceptible to. That way, they can prescribe the right antibiotic for the job.
Like a detective story.
Yeah.
Identify the culprit, then choose the right weapon.
You got it.
Hmm.
Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk more about how penicillin actually moves through the body. We touched on this earlier with the concept of pharmacokinetics.
Right, pharmacokinetics, what the body does to the drug. It's all about absorption, distribution, metabolism, and elimination.
Precisely. And for penicillin G, we need to consider different routes of administration.
Like what?
For example, when given intravenously, it reaches the bloodstream very quickly. But when taken orally, stomach acid can break it down, reducing its effectiveness. That's why there's a more acid-stable version for oral use, called penicillin VK.
So that's why there are different formulations of penicillin.
Yeah.
It's all about tailoring the delivery method for maximum impact.
Exactly. Another key factor is distribution.
Okay.
Penicillin G can reach various tissues and fluids, even crossing the blood-brain barrier to some extent, especially when there's inflammation.
It can reach the brain?
You might be surprised to know that penicillin can even reach the brain, especially when there's inflammation. This is crucial for treating infections like meningitis.
Wow, that's interesting.
Right. And finally, we have elimination. As we mentioned earlier, penicillin G is primarily eliminated by the kidneys, which is why dosage adjustments might be needed for people with kidney problems.
Okay, so it's like a carefully orchestrated journey through the body. Now let's circle back to those bacterial defenses again. We've talked about beta-lactamases and PBP2A. Are there any other ways bacteria can resist penicillin's attack?
Yes. Remember those penicillin-binding proteins, those targets that penicillin tries to lock onto?
Uh-huh.
Well, some clever bacteria have figured out how to modify those proteins, making them less attractive to penicillin.
It's like they changed the locks on their doors so the penicillin key can't get in and do its job.
Exactly. This modification makes it harder for penicillin to bind and disrupt cell wall synthesis.
So it's like an ongoing arms race. Bacteria are constantly evolving, and we're constantly trying to outsmart them.
That's a great way to put it. And it emphasizes the importance of antibiotic stewardship.
Speaking of antibiotic stewardship, can you remind us what that means and why it's so important?
Antibiotic stewardship is all about using antibiotics wisely to preserve their effectiveness and prevent further resistance. It involves several key principles, like choosing the right antibiotic for the specific infection, using it for the appropriate duration, and avoiding unnecessary prescriptions.
So how can you as a listener contribute to antibiotic stewardship? It's not just about doctors prescribing wisely. It's also about taking antibiotics exactly as prescribed, not pressuring your doctor for antibiotics when they're not needed,
Yeah.
and understanding that antibiotics don't work for viral infections like the common cold or flu.
Excellent points. It's a collective effort involving healthcare providers, patients, and the community as a whole.
Now let's talk about the concept of spectrum of activity.
The spectrum of activity refers to the range of bacteria that an antibiotic can effectively target. Each antibiotic has its own unique spectrum.
So it's like each antibiotic has its own hit list of bacteria it can take down.
That's a great analogy. And for penicillin G, its hit list includes Streptococcus species, particularly those causing pneumonia and throat infections.
Okay.
It's also effective against Neisseria, responsible for gonorrhea and some forms of meningitis. And let's not forget its potency against Treponema pallidum, the culprit behind syphilis.
Wow. Penicillin G covers some serious infections. What about those penicillinase-resistant penicillins? Do they have a broader spectrum?
Their spectrum is similar to penicillin G with added coverage for Staph aureus strains that produce beta-lactamases. Remember, they're not effective against MRSA.
Okay, so it's like choosing the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
And that's where lab testing comes in, to help doctors make the best decision.
Absolutely. Identifying the specific bacteria and its susceptibility to different antibiotics is key to successful treatment.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. Before we move on, let's recap the key points. We learned about penicillinase-resistant penicillins, their strengths against certain staph infections, and their limitations against MRSA. We also explored pharmacokinetics in more detail, understanding how penicillin moves through the body, and we discussed the importance of antibiotic stewardship in preserving the effectiveness of these life-saving drugs.
A fantastic summary. We've delved into the fascinating world of penicillin, learned about its mechanisms of action, its pharmacokinetic adventures, and its spectrum of activity. Now let's get practical and talk about when and how penicillin is used in the real world.
Okay, so we've talked about how penicillin works, what the body does to it, and even how bacteria try to fight back.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
It is. So now let's actually talk about how it's used to treat infections in the real world.
All right, let's start with penicillin G, the original penicillin, that revolutionized medicine.
Yeah, the OG.
Exactly. Despite its limitations, it's still a really valuable tool.
Okay, I remember you mentioned it's like the go-to treatment for syphilis.
That's right. Penicillin G is still considered the gold standard for treating syphilis,
Really?
which is a sexually transmitted infection caused by this bacterium, Treponema pallidum.
Treponema pallidum.
Okay, got it. And it's effective in all stages of the disease, from primary to tertiary syphilis, including neurosyphilis, which affects the brain and spinal cord.
Wow, that's a lot of coverage.
It is.
But I imagine the dosage and how it's given might vary depending on how advanced the infection is.
Absolutely. For early stages of syphilis, a single intramuscular injection of penicillin G benzathine is often enough.
Penicillin G benzathine. What's that?
It's a long-acting formulation of penicillin G, but for later stages, multiple doses or intravenous administration might be necessary.
So it's all about tailoring the treatment to the individual patient and the stage of the infection.
That's right.
Makes sense. Now, besides syphilis, what are some other infections where penicillin G is still commonly used?
Penicillin G is also effective against certain Streptococcus infections,
Okay.
particularly those causing pneumonia and throat infections like strep throat.
So those everyday infections that we all get sometimes.
Exactly. It's a classic treatment for these common bacterial illnesses.
Okay, good to know. Now let's talk about those penicillinase-resistant penicillins like Oxacillin and Nafcillin. What types of infections are they particularly good at fighting?
These penicillins are champions against Staph aureus infections,
Okay, Staph aureus.
including those pesky skin infections like boils and abscesses.
Yeah, those are not fun.
Right. And they can also be used for more serious Staph aureus infections, like bone infections or heart valve infections.
So they cover a wide range of staph-related problems.
Yeah, they do. But as we discussed earlier, they're not effective against MRSA.
Right, because of that special protein MRSA has.
Exactly. MRSA has that modified penicillin-binding protein, PBP2A,
Right.
that makes it resistant to these types of penicillins.
Got it. So even though these penicillins are powerful, it's crucial to use the right one for the right infection.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk about side effects. I know no medication is perfect,
Mm.
and I'm sure penicillin has its downsides. What are some potential side effects that people should be aware of?
That's an important question. Penicillin is generally well tolerated, but like any drug, it can cause side effects. The most common ones are gastrointestinal issues,
Okay, like what?
like nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea.
Yeah.
But these are usually mild and tend to go away on their own.
Okay, the usual suspects. But are there any more serious side effects that we should be concerned about?
Yes, there are. Although rare allergic reactions can occur, and they can range from mild skin rashes to a severe life-threatening reaction called anaphylaxis.
Anaphylaxis. That sounds serious.
It is a serious allergic reaction that requires immediate medical attention.
Okay.
It's crucial for anyone with a known penicillin allergy to avoid taking it and to inform their healthcare provider about their allergy.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Noted. Are there any other potential side effects that we should be aware of?
In some cases, penicillin can cause kidney problems, especially in people who already have kidney disease.
Okay.
It can also affect blood cell counts, leading to anemia or low platelet levels, but these are less common.
So it sounds like it's all about weighing the benefits against the risks. Penicillin can be a lifesaver, but it's important to use it cautiously and under the guidance of a healthcare professional.
I completely agree. Now let's zoom out and think about the bigger picture. With antibiotic resistance on the rise, what does the future hold for penicillin?
That's a big question. Will penicillin still be effective in the years to come?
That's a question that scientists and researchers are grappling with every day. The future of penicillin is intertwined with this broader issue of antibiotic resistance. As we've discussed, bacteria are incredibly adaptable, and they're constantly evolving new ways to resist antibiotics.
So it's like a constant battle, a race against time to stay one step ahead of those clever microbes. What are some of the strategies being explored to combat antibiotic resistance and ensure that penicillin remains a valuable tool?
One promising strategy is the development of new penicillin derivatives that can overcome these existing resistance mechanisms. Scientists are tinkering with penicillin's structure to create new versions that can basically bypass those bacterial defenses.
So it's like creating new keys to fit those ever-changing bacterial locks.
Exactly. Another approach is combining penicillin with other drugs, like beta-lactamase inhibitors, to enhance its activity. It's like giving penicillin a powerful sidekick to help it fight those resistant bacteria.
That's a great analogy. Are there any other approaches being explored?
Absolutely. Beyond developing new drugs, there's a growing emphasis on antibiotic stewardship, which we discussed earlier.
Right.
By promoting responsible antibiotic use, we can help preserve the effectiveness of existing antibiotics, including penicillin. This involves using antibiotics only when necessary, choosing the right antibiotic for this specific infection, and completing the full course of treatment as prescribed.
So it's a multifaceted approach involving scientific innovation, responsible prescribing practices, and patient education.
Precisely. It's a collective effort to ensure that these life-saving medications remain effective for generations to come.
Well, folks, we've reached the end of our penicillin deep dives. We've explored its history, its mechanisms of action, its clinical uses, its side effects, and even peered into its future.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? From a serendipitous discovery in a moldy petri dish to a cornerstone of modern medicine.
Absolutely. We've learned about its strengths and limitations, its triumphs and challenges, and most importantly, we've gained a deeper appreciation for this remarkable drug that has saved countless lives and continues to play a vital role in our fight against infectious diseases.
Penicillin's story is truly a testament to scientific ingenuity, the power of observation, and this ongoing quest to protect human health.
I agree. Before we sign off, I want to leave you with this thought. Imagine a world without antibiotics, a world where a simple cut or a common cold could turn deadly. It's a sobering thought, and it highlights the importance of responsible antibiotic use and the need for continued research and innovation in this field.
Absolutely. We owe it to ourselves and to future generations to preserve the effectiveness of these life-saving medications. Let's all do our part by using antibiotics wisely and supporting efforts to develop new ones.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And a huge thanks to our expert for guiding us through this fascinating deep dive into the world of penicillin.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our amazing listeners, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your fellow knowledge enthusiasts. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those microbes at bay.